My name is Matthew Hoffman, and for 15 years, I've worked in the skies as a commercial pilot, flying routes that most people only see on a map. I've navigated massive storms at 35,000 feet, managed complex system failures and heavy turbulence, and held the lives of hundreds of passengers in my hands during every takeoff and landing. None of that prepared me for the 7 minutes I spent dead on a Denver sidewalk while Jesus showed me what's really coming, not in symbols or metaphors, but in vivid detail that still makes my hands shake when I try to explain it. The transition from life to death happened faster than a change in cabin pressure. One moment, I was walking toward my hotel during a layover, feeling a crushing weight in my chest and watching the gray winter sky blur above me. The next moment, I was standing in a place that made every sunset I've seen from a cockpit look dull and lifeless. The ground beneath me wasn't ground at all. It was translucent, like standing on compressed light that somehow held my weight. Mountains rose in the distance, but they weren't made of rock. They were formed from something that looked like crystallized glory, if that makes any sense. I was still wearing my pilot's uniform, still had the Denver slush on my shoes, but I wasn't in Colorado anymore. The air in this place didn't just fill my lungs, it felt like it was feeding my very soul. There was a peace here so thick it was almost tangible, like a warm blanket wrapped around me after a long night flight. I looked down at my hands, and they were glowing with a soft, steady radiance. I realized I wasn't afraid. In the cockpit, when things go wrong, your adrenaline spikes and your focus narrows to the dials and the switches. But here, my focus was wider than the horizon. I felt more awake than I had ever been in my 36 years of life. That's when I saw him. He wasn't walking so much as moving through the light, and as he approached, the atmosphere changed. It became heavy with a kind of weight that didn't press down on me but seemed to pull me upward. I recognized him instantly, not because of any painting I'd seen in the small church back in Chicago, but because my spirit simply knew its maker. He looked at me, and I felt like every flight log, every secret thought, and every moment of my life was laid bare, yet I felt no shame, only a profound sense of being known. "Matthew," he said. His voice was like a frequency that resonated in my bones. "You've spent your life navigating the physical heavens. You've learned to trust your instruments when the clouds hide the earth. Now I am going to show you the storm most of my people can't recognize. I will show you how the enemy will deceive them with something they'll mistake for salvation. You must see what is coming so you can tell them how to find their way through the fog." He reached out and touched my shoulder, and the translucent ground vanished. We weren't falling, but we were moving through the atmosphere of Earth at a speed that would have ripped a jet apart. We were hovering over the planet, but it wasn't the view from a satellite. I could see the spiritual currents flowing through the cities like glowing veins of gold and jagged streaks of black. In some places, the light was strong, but in many others, a thick, oily darkness was settling over the rooftops and the streets. "Look at the centers of power," Jesus said. I looked down and saw a vision of a massive office complex in a city that felt like Geneva or London. Inside, men and women were sitting around a table that looked like it was carved from shadow. They weren't shouting or plotting like villains in a movie. They were calm, professional, and terrifyingly efficient. I saw them looking at maps of the world's food supply and energy grids. On their screens, I saw red lines crossing out regions, shutting down ports, and halting the flow of goods. It looked like a calculated strategy to bring the world to its knees. Not through bombs, but through the slow strangulation of the things people need to survive. "They are preparing the hunger," Jesus explained. "They will create a void that only they claim to be able to fill. When people are hungry and cold, they will trade their freedom for a crust of bread, but the hunger of the belly is only the first step. The real trap is the hunger of the heart." The scene shifted instantly. I was standing in the middle of a major international airport, my own world. But the bustling energy I was used to was replaced by a hollow, haunting silence. Rows of massive aircraft sat on the tarmac, their engines covered, their tires beginning to deflate. Inside the terminal, the polished floors were covered in dust. There were no travelers, no announcements, no frantic rushing. Just a few security guards wearing masks that covered their entire faces, standing like statues under flickering lights. I saw a pilot, a man who looked like he could have been my mentor, sitting on a bench in the empty terminal. He was holding his flight cap in his hand, staring at it with tears in his eyes. He looked broken, like a man who had lost his purpose. The entire industry that I had dedicated my life to had been hollowed out. It wasn't because of a war or a fuel shortage. It was because people were too afraid to move. The world will stop, Jesus said. The paths of travel will be closed. I am showing you this because the enemy wants to isolate my children. He wants them to feel alone, trapped in their own homes, watching screens that tell them what to think and what to fear. When the world stops moving, the mind begins to wander into dark places. That is when the deception takes root. I watched as the vision moved into the residential streets surrounding the airport. I saw people looking out of their windows with eyes full of suspicion. I saw a neighbor watching a neighbor, wondering if they were carrying the sickness that the news wouldn't stop talking about. The fabric of human connection was fraying. People weren't talking to each other anymore. They were shouting through doors or sending messages filled with anger and dread. Then, the vision took me inside a house. It was a normal, middle-class home. A young couple was sitting on their couch, the blue light of the television reflecting off their pale faces. The news anchor was speaking in a voice that sounded like a warning bell that never stopped ringing. They were talking about a new sickness, something that didn't have a name yet, but was causing people to simply collapse in the streets. I saw the sickness manifest. It wasn't like a fever or a cough. I saw a man standing in his kitchen, reaching for a glass of water. Suddenly, his eyes went blank. Blank. He didn't gasp or clutch his chest. He simply went limp, his body hitting the floor with a dull thud. His wife ran to him, screaming, but he was just gone. Not dead, but as if the pilot of his own body had suddenly walked out of the cockpit. "This is the silent plague," Jesus whispered. "It is a sickness of the nervous system and the spirit. It will baffle the wise and terrify the strong. It will move across the borders without a sound, and no wall will be able to keep it out. People will be afraid to touch, afraid to breathe, afraid to even look at one another." We moved again, this time to a laboratory that looked like something out of a dream. It was filled with white light and machines that hummed with a low, vibrating power. Scientists were working with small vials of a shimmering liquid. I could see the spiritual reality of that liquid. It wasn't just medicine. It was infused with a dark, cold intelligence. It looked like tiny, microscopic shards of glass that pulsed with a rhythmic light. "They will say they have found the cure," Jesus said. "They will tell the world that they can restart the engines of society. They will promise that if you take their solution, you can fly again, work again, and hug your family again. The world will be so desperate for a return to the way things were that they won't ask what the price is. They will think they are being saved, but they are only being prepared for the harvest of the enemy." I saw a vision of a massive stadium. It was filled with thousands of people. They weren't there for a game or a concert. They were standing in long, winding lines that stretched out of the gates and down the streets for miles. At the center of the stadium, there were booths set up. People were walking in, getting a quick injection in their wrists, and walking out with a look of pure, ecstatic relief. I looked closer at the people who were leaving. On the surface, they looked healthy. They were smiling and laughing. But when I looked at them through the spiritual lens Jesus was providing, I saw a thin gray veil beginning to wrap around their hearts. It was like a spider web, fine and almost invisible, but it was tightening. It was muting the colors of their souls. Their joy didn't feel like real joy. It felt like a programmed response, a chemical imitation of peace. "Watch the children," he commanded. I saw a mother bringing her young son to the booth. The boy was afraid, clutching his mother's hand. The woman at the booth gave him a piece of candy and smiled. She was kind, she was gentle. She told him it would only sting for a second. The needle went in, and as the liquid entered his small body, I saw a spark of light, the pure, God-given light of a child's spirit, flicker and dim. He didn't cry. He just stopped looking at the sky. He looked down at the candy, his eyes becoming dull and focused only on the immediate physical world. The horror of it made me want to scream, but I had no physical voice. I could only feel the overwhelming grief of the one standing beside me. This wasn't just a medical procedure. It was a systematic dismantling of the bridge between the human and the divine. "The enemy knows he cannot win a direct war against me," Jesus said. So he seeks to change the very nature of those I love. He seeks to make them into something that can no longer hear my voice. He is building a wall, not of stone, but of biology and light. And the most terrible part, Matthew, is that they will build it themselves, one injection at a time, believing they are doing the right thing for their families. I saw a vision of a world leader, a man with silver hair and a voice that sounded like a cello. He was standing on a stage in front of a giant screen that showed images of a healed planet, green forests, clear blue skies, and happy, healthy people. He was talking about the Great Restoration. He spoke of a world where there was no more disease, no more poverty, and no more conflict. He said that the biometric implant was the key to this new utopia. It would manage everyone's health, distribute resources fairly, and ensure that no one was ever left behind. We are moving beyond the old ways, the man said, his eyes shining with a frightening conviction. We are taking charge of our own evolution. We are the architects of our future. The crowd below him roared with approval. I saw people falling to their knees, not in prayer to God, but in gratitude to this man and the system he represented. They were worshiping the solution to the problems that had been created to make them worship. It was a perfect closed loop of deception. This is the first part of the storm, Jesus said, his voice echoing through the vision. The clouds are already gathering. The wind is starting to howl. My people must learn to fly by the Spirit, not by their physical sight. If they rely on their own understanding, they will fly straight into the side of the mountain. The vision shifted again, moving from the massive stadiums and labs to something much closer to home. We were standing inside a church that looked like many I had seen in the suburbs of Chicago. It was a beautiful building with high ceilings and soft lighting. The band was playing a song that sounded familiar, and the people in the seats were swaying with their eyes closed. On the surface, it looked like a powerful move of the Spirit. But as I stood there with Jesus, he pointed to the stage. The pastor was a man I recognized from television. He was articulate, charismatic, and had a way of making the most difficult scriptures feel easy to swallow. He was standing behind a glass pulpit, and as he spoke, his face appeared on massive screens behind him. We must be the hands and feet of Christ in this new world, he was saying. The Lord has provided a way for us to protect the vulnerable. He has given our scientists the wisdom to create a shield against the darkness of disease. To refuse this gift is to refuse the love of your neighbor. We are entering a season of great unity, and the mark of a true believer is their willingness to sacrifice their own doubts for the common good. I looked at the congregation as they listened. Almost every person in the room had a small, glowing bandage on their wrist, or the faint red mark of a recent injection. As they nodded in agreement, I saw the spiritual atmosphere of the room. Usually, when people worship, there is a flow of light that rises from their hearts toward heaven, a connection that looks like golden threads reaching into the infinite. But here, the threads were frayed. The light wasn't rising. It was hitting an invisible ceiling just a few inches above their heads and reflecting back down. They feel peace, Jesus said, and his voice was like a knife through the music. But it is the peace of a dead engine. It is the calm of a ship that has lost its power and is simply drifting with the current. The implant is modulating their emotions. It is smoothing out the rough edges of their conviction. They no longer feel the conviction of my spirit because the biological receptors for that frequency have been dampened. They think they are being spiritual, but they are only being regulated. I watched as a young man in the third row began to weep. In a normal service, I would have thought he was being touched by God. But Jesus let me see into his mind. The man was weeping because he felt a profound sense of emptiness that he couldn't explain. He was trying to reach out to God, but it was like he was trying to use a radio with the antenna broken. He could hear the noise, he could see the dials, but he couldn't catch the signal. Instead of falling on his knees in repentance or seeking the truth, he looked at his wrist. The implant pulsed with a soft, blue light, and within seconds, his weeping stopped. A look of forced, artificial serenity washed over his face. He sat back down, satisfied that his moment of doubt had passed. "This is the theft of the soul," Jesus whispered. The enemy isn't coming with a pitchfork and a roar. He is coming with a sedative. He is coming with a promise to take away the pain of living in a fallen world. But without the pain, there can be no growth. Without the struggle, there is no need for faith. They are trading their birthright as children of the living God for a chemical guarantee of comfort. The scene changed instantly. Now we were in a grocery store in a busy city. It was crowded and clean, but there was a tension in the air that felt like the moments before a massive thunderstorm. I saw a woman at the checkout counter. She had a cart full of food, milk, bread, vegetables. When it came time to pay, she didn't reach for a wallet. She simply held her wrist over a scanner. The machine chirped a happy sound and a green light flashed. But then, the man behind her in line stepped up. He looked tired, his clothes were a bit worn, and his eyes were clear, bright with a light that the others didn't have. When the cashier asked for his identification, he shook his head. "I don't have the implant," he said quietly. The atmosphere in the store shifted in a heartbeat. The cashier, who had been smiling a moment ago, suddenly looked at him with a mixture of fear and disgust. The people in the line behind him began to murmur. I saw the spiritual reality of their reaction. Their implants were reacting to his presence, sending signals of danger and non-compliance to their brains. They weren't just annoyed, they felt a physical revulsion toward him. "Sir, you can't be in here without a verified health status," the cashier said, her voice rising. "It's a matter of public safety. You're putting everyone at risk." "I just need to buy food for my kids," the man pleaded. He held out a handful of cash, paper bills that looked ancient in this high-tech world. The cashier wouldn't touch the money. She backed away as if he were holding a handful of poison. A security guard moved in, his hand resting on a weapon that looked more like a high-powered taser than a gun. He escorted the man out of the store while the other shoppers watched with cold, stony faces. Not one person spoke up for him. Not one person felt the urge to help. "The heart of man will grow cold," Jesus said. "The system is designed to reward the compliant and starve the faithful. The technology creates a wall between the clean and the unclean. Those who have the implant will truly believe they are the virtuous ones, while those who refuse will be treated as the source of all the world's problems. It is a social prison with no bars, only a scanner at every door." I saw the man walk out into the parking lot. He sat on the curb and put his head in his hands. He looked completely defeated. But then something happened that made my spirit leap. A car pulled up, an old beat-up truck. A woman stepped out and walked over to him. She didn't have the glow of the implant on her wrist. She reached into the back of her truck and pulled out a bag of apples and a loaf of bread. "I saw what happened," she said. "We have a garden. We have enough." As they touched, a spark of genuine divine light passed between them. It was 1,000,000 times brighter than any of the blue pulses from the implants in the store. It was the light of the remnant, the light of a love that requires no technology and fears no system. "Do you see?" Jesus asked. "The darkness is vast, but it cannot swallow a single candle. My people will be pushed to the edges of society. They will be hunted, they will be hungry, and they will be forgotten by the world. But they will be more alive than they have ever been. Their dependence on me will be absolute, and because of that, my power will flow through them without hindrance." He took me to a high place, a mountain overlooking a valley. In the valley, I saw two different worlds existing side by side. On one side, there was a city that looked like a jewel. It was filled with light, moving vehicles that made no sound, and people who lived in perfect, regulated harmony. There was no crime, no visible poverty, and no sickness. It looked like the paradise men have always dreamed of. But then Jesus adjusted my vision, and I saw the spiritual truth of that city. It was a graveyard. The people moving through the streets were like ghosts. They had no spiritual weight. They were like puppets on invisible strings, their every move and thought guided by the network they had invited into their bodies. There was no prayer in that city. There was no worship. There was no soul. On the other side of the valley, in the dark woods and the rocky caves, were the others. They were cold. They were living in tents or small shacks. They were weary from constant movement and the stress of being outlaws. But as I looked at them, I saw that they were burning like small suns. They were gathered around fires, singing songs of praise that echoed off the canyon walls. I saw angels standing guard at the perimeter of their camps, their swords drawn and glowing with a fierce, holy fire. I saw a father in one of these camps teaching his daughter how to read from a tattered Bible by the light of a candle. He was explaining the stories of the martyrs, of those who had gone before them. The girl's eyes were wide and full of a depth of wisdom that children in the city could never understand. She knew who she was. She knew who her king was. "The price of the city is your spirit," Jesus said. "The price of the wilderness is your comfort." Most will choose the city. They will convince themselves that they can have both, that they can take the implant and still serve me. But no man can serve two masters. Once the bridge is broken at the biological level, the ability to choose is lost. They become part of the machine, and the machine has no room for me. I saw a vision of the network itself. It wasn't just in the implants, it was in the air. I saw invisible waves of energy crisscrossing the planet, a web of signals that connected every person, every machine, and every thought to a central hub. At the center of this hub, I saw a presence that was ancient and full of malice. It was watching the web, feeling every heartbeat and every impulse. It was looking for the gaps, the places where the signals couldn't reach. It was looking for the remnant. The enemy wants total coverage, Jesus explained. He wants a world where there is no place to hide from his gaze, but he can never account for the supernatural. He can never predict the way I will move through those who are truly mine. He thinks he has won because he has the majority, but I have always used the few to confound the many. I watched as the global system began to tighten its grip. I saw schools where children were required to have the implant to enter the classroom. I saw hospitals where surgeons were required to have it to pick up a scalpel. I saw banks where you couldn't access your own savings without a biometric scan. The world was being locked down, one sector at a time. I saw a group of believers in a basement. They were terrified. They were talking about the latest laws that made their gatherings illegal. One man was arguing that they should just take the implant so they could keep their jobs and support the church. "We can use the money to fund the mission," he said, his voice desperate. "God knows our hearts. He wouldn't want our families to suffer." But an elderly woman stood up. She didn't have a degree or a title, but she had the authority of a lifetime of walking with God. "If you take the enemy's mark to do God's work, you are no longer doing God's work," she said firmly. "You are trying to build the kingdom with the tools of hell. We will trust the Lord for our bread, or we will go hungry, but we will not bow." As she spoke, the room was filled with a fragrance like lilies. I saw the Spirit of God resting on her like a crown. The man who had been arguing fell to his knees and repented. They all joined hands, and I saw a shield of light form around that house. Even as the police hovered outside in their silent drones, they couldn't see the house. It was as if it had been folded out of their dimension. "I will hide my own," Jesus said. "I will provide for them in ways that will make the manna in the desert look like a small thing, but they must be willing to lose the world to find me. The deception will be so thick that even the very elect would be deceived if the time were not shortened. That is why you must go back, Matthew. You must tell them that the peace the world offers is a trap. You must tell them that the safety they are promised is the door to a prison." The vision shifted one final time, and the scale of what I was seeing became even more immense. It was as if Jesus was pulling back the final veil to show me the machinery of the spiritual war that was hidden behind the sleek modern surface of the world. We were looking at the earth again, but this time I saw the air filled with a shimmering artificial net. It wasn't made of wires, but of frequencies and signals that pulsed in a rhythmic, hypnotic beat. Every person with the implant was a node in this net. Their heartbeats, their breathing, and even their basic thoughts were being fed into a central hub that glowed with a cold, sickly green light. "The enemy has always wanted to be like the Most High," Jesus said. "He wants to be omnipresent, but he cannot. He wants to be omniscient, but he is limited. So, he uses this technology to create a counterfeit version of my presence. He wants a world where he can see every move and influence every heart simultaneously. This implant is the physical anchor for that dark kingdom. It is the antenna that allows his whispers to sound like a person's own thoughts. I saw a woman sitting in a quiet park reading a book. She looked peaceful, but as I watched, her implant pulsed. Suddenly, she closed her book and looked around with a strange, blank expression. A thought had been placed in her mind. Not an evil thought, but a directive. She felt a sudden, overwhelming urge to report a neighbor she had seen praying in a backyard. She didn't feel like a spy or a traitor. She felt like a good citizen doing her part for the collective health of the world. The technology had bypassed her conscience and was speaking directly to her nervous system. The conditioning is almost complete, Jesus warned. This is why I told you the implant is not the mark itself, but the preparation for it. It hollows out the house so that the master of the house can be replaced. By the time the final mark is introduced, the one that demands total conscious worship of the beast, the people will have no spiritual immune system left to resist it. They will have been trained to follow the peace of the signal rather than the truth of my word. He showed me a vision of a future courtroom. A group of believers was standing before a judge who looked perfectly reasonable and kind. The judge wasn't screaming or threatening them with fire. He was speaking in a voice of deep concern. "We don't want to hurt you," the judge said. "We just want you to be part of the solution. Your refusal to join the network is causing a break in the social harmony. It's creating a pocket of unpredictability that the system cannot manage. For the sake of the children, for the sake of the planet, why won't you just accept the update? It's just a simple adjustment to your current health monitor." I saw the believers' faces. They were thin and tired, but their eyes were like burning coals. They didn't argue with the judge's logic. They didn't try to explain the theology of the end times. They simply stood in the strength of a presence that the judge couldn't see. "Our king is not of this world," one of them replied. The judge sighed, a look of genuine sadness on his face, the kind of look a doctor gives a patient who refuses life-saving surgery. He signaled to the guards, and the believers were led away. But as they walked, I saw that they weren't walking alone. There were beings of light walking with them, taller than the guards, their wings folded, but their power radiating so strongly that the electronics in the courtroom began to flicker and fail. The more the world relies on the machine, the more vulnerable they become to the supernatural, Jesus said. The enemy thinks he is building a fortress, but he is actually building a glass house. My people will move through his walls like they are made of smoke. They will have a power that no signal can jam and no frequency can silence. I saw a vision of the 18-month timeline he had mentioned. It felt like a countdown clock in the spirit. I saw the months passing, and with each one, the pressure to comply increased. I saw the moments of choice for thousands of people. I saw a man in an office tower staring at a screen that told him he would lose his pension if he didn't get the health update by Friday. I saw a mother in a kitchen looking at her empty cupboards and then at the glowing wrist of her neighbor who had plenty of food. The testing reveals what's genuine, Jesus repeated. His eyes were fixed on those moments of decision. Every time a person chose to trust him over the system, a new star seemed to ignite in the spiritual firmament. Every time a person gave in, a light went out. "Tell them to store up my word in their hearts now," he said with a sudden, sharp intensity. When the signal begins to cloud the mind, the only thing that will cut through is the living word. They must know voice so intimately that no imitation can deceive them. They must learn to recognize the still, small voice over the roar of the world's safety and security. The vision began to fade, the colors of the earth and the shimmering net dissolving back into the brilliant light of the place where we stood. I felt a pulling sensation, like a tether being yanked from miles away. I knew I was leaving. I wanted to stay in that peace and that light. But the weight of the message was pressing into me, demanding to be carried back. Jesus gripped my shoulder one last time. His touch was like a seal, a brand of fire that I knew would never leave me. "Go back, Matthew. Tell them that the time for lukewarm faith is over. The storm is here, and the only way through it is to be completely hidden in me. Tell them not to fear the hunger, the cold, or the exclusion. Fear only the loss of the soul. I am with them until the end of the age, but they must choose which world they belong to. The light intensified until it was all I could see. The translucent mountains, the glowing ground, and the face of the Lord were swallowed up in a white brilliance that felt like a physical weight. I felt myself rushing downward, a sensation of incredible speed that made my spirit feel like it was being compressed. Suddenly, the silence was shattered by a sharp, rhythmic sound. It was the sound of a heart monitor. The cold hit me first. The freezing, damp cold of a Denver winter. Then the pain. It felt like my chest had been crushed by a falling building. I gasped, and it felt like swallowing broken glass. My eyes snapped open, and for a moment, I couldn't distinguish between the spiritual light I had just seen and the harsh, blue-white glare of the streetlights and the ambulance strobes. "We've got a pulse," someone shouted. A face appeared over mine, a paramedic with wide, disbelieving eyes. He was holding a pair of defibrillator paddles, his breath fogging in the frigid air. "Stay with us, buddy," he said, his voice shaking. "You've been gone for 7 minutes. Don't you dare leave us again." I tried to speak, but I could only cough. My hand moved instinctively to my wrist, feeling for the mark I had seen in the vision. There was nothing there but my own skin, cold and pale. I looked past the paramedic at the gray, slushy sidewalk of Denver. People were standing around, watching the scene with a mixture of curiosity and dread. To them, it was just a medical emergency. To me, it was the start of the final countdown. I looked at the paramedic's tablet as he logged the time of my return. February 24th. The date burned into my mind. I had been given a window, a brief moment in history, to stand as a witness. The injuries I sustained, the cracked ribs from the CPR, the internal damage, were nothing compared to the weight of the truth I was carrying. I know what you're thinking right now, that this sounds impossible, that no one could predict something so specific that I'm either lying or deluded. 7 days ago, I would have thought the same thing about anyone telling this story. But I died on a Denver sidewalk, and what Jesus showed me in those 7 minutes changed everything. The implant is real. The timeline is set, and your decision about what to do with this warning will determine more than just your survival. It will determine where you spend eternity. I want to thank you personally for staying with me until the end of my testimony. If you're still here, I believe this message reached your heart for a reason. Please tell me in the comments where you're watching from so I can pray for you and your country. If my story meant something to you, subscribe and turn on notifications so you don't miss the next message I share. And if you feel led, share this with someone you love. You never know how one simple click can help restore faith, renew hope, and bring someone closer to God.